Hi everybody, welcome to this week's tutorial. It's on the Principles of Anthropology. This week we're going to be studying anthropology. Let's talk real quick about this word. This word anthropo is, like most Greek and Latin words, it's two, anthropology is two words put together. The ending O-L-O-G-Y comes from the Greek word logos, which means to study. The first word anthropo comes from the Greek word for man or human, which is anthropo. And so when you put them together, you get the study of man's or the study of human. Now, a lot of times this will include things like their culture, a little bit about their behavior and other things, in addition to what we're going to be studying mostly today, which is the anatomy of humans. So we're going to be talking a lot about anatomy and how anatomy helps forensics sciences do things like discover the identity of a victim. Your objective is going to be to describe the relevance of anthropology in forensic science. So the first thing we're going to talk about is examination of skeletal remains. As you know, when a human body, or really any mammal, any animal body dies, one of the last things to decompose, and sometimes it never decomposes, would be the bones. Now, you've heard of fossils. We're not talking about fossils here. Now, anthropologists can often study fossils, but in this case, we're talking about bones that have not fossilized. They have, simply decomposed. The rest of the body has decomposed around it, leaving the very hard structures. And given time, given the right conditions, these bones will decompose as well. But quite often, you can find bone and bone fragment remnants for years, maybe even hundreds of years, certainly long enough for us to do an analysis of finding a body that's only been dead for a few months or a few years. Some things about this is that we know an awful lot about how bones decompose. We also know an awful lot about the anatomy of a human and other organisms with similar shaped bones. And we know a lot about how humans develop. So we're able to make a lot of determinations about a victim based on simply bones. And we don't even have to have all the bones. We can learn an awful lot about a victim with a very small amount of bones. Some things, sadly, we are going to talk about infants a little bit today, because sadly infants die as well and they have to be identified. Infants at birth have about 270 bones. Adults have 206. So what happens to the 64 bones? Well, they fuse together. Your skull is, for the top part at least, one large piece. But as an infant, to help come out through the birth canal, the skull is actually rather flexible with cartilage in between. And so the skeleton is made up of about 8 bones as the child is born. Well, here it says 28, but I think that includes the mandible and the teeth and all kinds of stuff, the facial bones. But 28 bones will then fuse together to comprise the skull, which is a lot less bones, right? When you start working your way down into what's called the thoracic cage, it also includes up to 80 bones. So here's the bottom line. We know where all the bones are in the human body, and we know how they fuse from birth all the way to the adult human structure. So we can learn an awful lot about the age, the gender. We can even talk about diseases that the victim may have had. It's pretty incredible what we can do. When you find bones at a crime scene or suspected human bones, the first thing you have to do is determine, is this a human bone? And in fact, a lot of times we may not even be looking at bone. We just look at something that looks an awful lot like bone. I have been fossil hunting for many times in the Peace River, in other areas around Okeechobee in South Florida, and even in other states. And quite often it's interesting. You find a bone, or you find a hard structure that could be a bone, it could be a rock, and you have to have a pretty good eye. You have to do some some experience with determining bones. And a lot of times I have a friend or two that I have to ask, hey, is this what I think this is? And I'm normally correct, but I've been wrong. And they say, no, that's just a rock. So the first thing you have to do is, after years of weathering, after years of the bone fragments falling apart, you could literally find a chip of a skull the size of a quarter and you don't know, is this a piece of bone, or is this just some kind of fragment of rock laying around? And today we also have things like plastic and wood and other things that we can mistaken for bone as well. So one of the things we have to do is we have to do some microscopy and look at the cross section of the bone to see if we can find the inside of the bone. And that's one of the ways you can tell, although you hate to cut it apart if you don't have to. Another way that you can do it is just a chemical test to see the calcium phosphorus ratio. And the calcium phosphorus ratio in human bones is pretty common or constant. So when we're looking at a rock, the calcium phosphorus ratio can be completely different, but in human bones it's pretty straightforward. So we can do chemical tests, we can do microscope tests, eye examinations. A lot of these things help us to determine whether or not it's actually a bone. After we identify them as bones, we make sure they're of a human origin, and this is going to be a thing. I mean, okay, so you found some bones, but maybe, I mean, I know I grew up on a cattle ranch, and when a cow dies, we sadly just drag it off to a corner of the pasture where it decomposes. And there's all kinds of bones there. If an untrained forensic scientist came across here, they may go, "My God, what's happened here? This is horrible." You know, there's always animal bones laying around, especially out in the wild. How do you determine if the bone that you have found at a suspected crime scene is that of a human victim? And there's lots of ways. We look at their anatomy. The humerus, that's your big upper arm bone. Okay, it goes from your elbow to your shoulder. There's only one. It connects at the scapula up at the shoulder blade and extends all the way to the elbow, which is where it connects to the radius and the ulna. It supports varied physical activities such as lifting, throwing, and so on. That's one bone we look at. We also know, right now we're just going to know what the bones are. The radius is the shorter bone of the forearm. It goes from the elbow up to the thumb, okay? And you know, if you'll take your hand right now and just do some turning, you'll notice that it actually, if you turn your hand where your palm is up, then your thumb is facing outside of your body, and the radius and the ulna are kind of parallel to each other. But if you turn your thumb over and put your palm face down, you'll notice that the radius actually crosses over the ulna and then makes like an X, okay? And so this is how you can rotate your arm. And you can only rotate it so far because that's just, you know, the radius and the ulna start to interact, all right? Of course, the ulna starts on the opposite side of the hand, the little pinky side of the hand, but it starts at the wrist and it goes all the way back to the elbow. You can feel it in there if you roll it around. Those are those bones. Now they help to stabilize, but they also give us the ability to rotate our hand. An unbelievable structure if you think about it, what you can do, okay? We're going to move down to your legs because your legs have a similar structure as well, kind of. We don't really rotate our legs all that much like we do our hand. But the big thigh bone, this is the largest bone in the human body. It is called the femur. It starts right at your pelvis and goes down to your knee. At your knee, it connects to the tibia and the fibula. The fibula is anatomically similar to the radius. The tibia is anatomically similar to the ulna, except that, you know, the fibula does not allow us as much rotation. I mean, if you try, I'm doing it right now on my leg, you can kind of rotate your foot a little bit, but not all that much. Our feet are not designed to be manipulative like our hands are. Our feet are designed for support, and so our bones in our lower legs are all designed for that as well. They also help to stabilize the ankle joints, so when you're running or walking or standing, you are much more stable on 2 feet. By the way, remember, humans are the only mammals that are designed to be on 2 legs. Every other mammal and almost every other bird or every other animal, it walks around on 4 legs, or they have a tail to help them maintain balance. So like a dog walks around on 4 legs. A bird does walk around on 2 legs, but they have a tail sticking out that helps them maintain balance. So humans have to have a really well-designed set of legs to keep us vertical and stable, standing upright. Another thing that you can use is the skull. The skull and the cranial bones are very different for humans than animals. There's some major differences. The bones are very different. Humans have large brains compared to their body. Okay, that's a very clear indication of um, a human skeleton. Just look at these two. Pretend like the eyes are the same size. Okay, you can see how the skeleton, the cranial area of the human skeleton, is much bigger than whatever this poor critter right here was. If the eyes were the same size, you would actually shrink this skull down a little bit. So relatively, humans have a pretty large brain. All right. Plus, the skull bones are smaller and more curved. Humans, look at how this thing is actually not as curvy. It's like, I don't know, it's more mushroomed out than this thing. It's more tightly curved. Okay. Animals don't have a chin. They have a V-shaped mandible. It just comes right here and goes right back. Whereas humans have a U shape right here. There's actually a curve here. This comes to a point, and this has a curve. All right, humans have a U-shaped mandible, and it gives them a chin. Animals don't have that chin. Okay, if we look at the vertebrae, we notice a couple of things. First of all, human vertebrae bones are larger, they're wider, they're flatter, because all of our weight from our hips up are put onto our vertebrae, right? Whereas animals typically lean over and use all four legs, and so they distribute the weight along four legs instead of across the vertebrae. So our vertebrae had to be bigger and wider and flatter. Okay. On the other hand, the vertebral column of an animal is small. It's convex on one side and concave on the other, so it's kind of like I don't know how to describe it, but if you look at a human vertebrae, the ends where they connect to each other are flat. Animals have like a bubble at the top and a place for the bubble at the bottom, and they connect that way. That's what convex and concave means. Humans have a sacrum that is kind of fused together. It's a triangular bone at the end of the vertebral column. And a million years ago, when humans had tails, if you believe in that, then what it was is this is bones of the tail that then fuse together just to create this sacrum, whereas animals haven't fused that together because they almost all have a tail, so that bone didn't fuse together, and the sacrum is still made up of a few relatively narrow bones. When we look at the upper limbs of humans, they're less robust. Now, robust means thick or heavy or strong. Okay. Now, that's not to say humans aren't strong, but we don't need to support the weight with our upper limbs like this chimpanzee walks around on its all four legs. It takes a lot of the weight. Our upper arms don't need to support that. So as a result, over years, our bones have gotten slightly smaller. Doesn't mean that we're not strong. It just means that we don't have to put half of our weight on our bones. Okay. The lower limbs, the legs, especially the pelvis. Okay, humans have a bowl-shaped pelvis for lots of reasons. It's wide and it's short, and our pelvis is designed to support all of our weight, whereas with animals it only supports about half the weight. And so humans change their shoulder blades and stuff, and they have a collarbone, whereas animals don't always have collarbones because they're supporting half their weight for the front and half their weight for the back. And so a lot of changes happen right across through the collarbone and the upper arms, the pelvis. Okay, animal bones are denser. They have less pores in them, and this is for various reasons. But in humans, the cortical bone is only about 1/4 as thick as the cortical bone is only about 1/4 of the total bone thickness. If you look at your femur, and you cut it in half, you're going to see there's a lot more porous stuff in there than there would be in an animal. Okay, in animals, the bones of the cranial vault are compact compared to that in humans, and there's various reasons for that, but that's just what you need to know. Again, more ways that you can tell if you found a bone, whether it's a human or an animal. Sadly, infants sometimes are part of the crime scene, and infant bones are often confused with animal bones because the infant bones haven't fused yet. So they're different. They look different than human bones, and they're smaller. Okay. There is this process called epiphysis. It's not a process, it's a thing. If you look at the ends of some of the bones for an infant, they don't have this is what they call the epiphysis. This area, they don't have the kind of the mushroomed out ends like regular bones do. for adults, and that's because they're still developing. And so sometimes it's hard to tell the ends. Now this is not, you see how this looks like this has actually been cut or broken. So a bone, any bone doesn't normally look that way, but you see how this flares out. This is just starting to happen, and so it's kind of hard to tell if that's a human bone or an infant bone. Often when somebody is out in the woods, they may find some bones, and they find a piece of a turtle shell, and it's curved. It looks like maybe it could be part of an infant skull, and it happens all the time, and they're reported to the sheriff's department all the time, and they come out and look at it, it's just a turtle. But that can happen. So infants are very difficult to identify at a crime scene. It takes a lot of experience. Another thing we can do with bones that we find of humans, once we identify them as humans, is now we can start identifying things like their gender and their age, which is very useful if you're looking at a victim. We need to know, was this a male or a female, and approximately how old. Okay, so the first step here is once you know that you have a crime scene with a human skeletal remains, you have to, there's a couple of steps. All right, the first step or the first stage is defining the area of investigation. Now, not to sound gruesome, but wouldn't it be nice if the person just kind of flopped over dead right there, and the skeletal remains were all in the same spot, and it's a nice small place? But sometimes, especially if animals have been kind of attacking the body after it died, the bones can be spread out, and so you have to kind of look around. Plus, you take a very light brush and maybe a very light trowel or kind of a pick, and you carefully clean away just to start seeing where it is. Yeah. The first step also is where you take a lot of pictures. You take a lot of pictures at all steps. So the first step is where you take a lot of pictures, because you can learn a lot about how the person died based on how they're lying down. How the skeleton is laying. And so a lot goes on in step one. Step two is exposing the remains. You very carefully remove all the soil from around it. If they were buried, think about it. There's a lot of soil around and even inside of the skeleton that has to be removed. But if you're not careful, you can destroy some evidence. So you got to be careful, slow, easy. Once you get it totally removed, and these two processes can go together. You don't have to totally remove all the soil from around the bones before you can start removing some of the remains. Tons of photographs. Today they're even starting to use something called photogrammetry, which is you can take a three-dimensional image of the crime scene, and as you remove the soil, you can get a three-dimensional image. And all that has to be done, but you can do that in pieces. You can expose some of the remains carefully, take pictures, remove the bones, and then keep going. But ultimately you want to lift out the remains. Now there's lots of reasons for this. We don't want to leave the bones. You want to have evidence, but also the family. If you can identify the family, there needs to be a proper, respectful burial. So what they do is, as they remove them, even if it's just a fragment, they'll number them, they'll arrange them, they'll weigh them, they'll shape them, they'll take all kinds of notes about them. This is called seriation. Okay, and again, that just makes sure that you are taking good notes and you have good data. Okay, and then finally, once you're done, all the soil, and actually, sorry, as you're doing it, so as you scoop out soil, you're going to put it through a screen, a series of screens actually. Each one of these screens, each one of these series, they're like stacked on top of each other. You got a wide screen at the top, a little bit tighter, a little bit tighter, a little bit tighter, until it gets down to 1/8 of an inch. It's almost like the screen on your front door or on your porch. But what happens is you dump dirt in there and you shake it, different size pieces get caught as they go down. And a lot of times it's nothing, it's leaves, it's other stuff, but sometimes you actually find bones that you've missed that have to be seriated as well. Once we determine that there is a human skeleton, the first thing we want to do is determine its gender. This is done in lots of ways, but there is a term called sexual dimorphism, meaning that male and female skeletons, especially in humans, have very specific characteristics for males versus females. Sometimes it's very easy to tell because females are very slight compared to males. But sometimes, you've seen kind of not so big males and kind of not so small females. So there's more things, and I didn't mean that disrespectfully to anyone, but there's more things going on here than just saying, oh, it's a human. We need to be able to look at some. Just because it's small doesn't mean it's a female, and just because it's large doesn't mean it's a male. Okay, but men do tend to have a more robust and larger skull than women. My wife tells me I'm hard-headed, and this is probably it. But comparatively in size, if you compare the size of the body to the size of the skull, men's tend to be larger and thicker, heavier. Okay, the chin part, right at the chin of the mandible, it tends to be more a little round, whereas the females tend to be a little bit more pointed. The angle of the ramus, which is the back corner of the mandible, which is right under your ear at the jaw, it tends to be a little bit more round in women and a little bit sharper in men. Some more things: the roof of the mouth, that's the upper part of the mouth where, like, if you push up on your tongue, that's called the palate. In males, it's a little bit broader, stretches out a little bit more, and it's larger. And in females, it's a little bit more narrowed, and it's smaller. The orbit of the eyes, commonly known as the eye socket, they're blunter in females. They're blunter in males and sharper in females. The brow ridges, that's right here on the skull, and you can rub your eyes if you want. Males have more of a bump up here than females do. Men have a receding or a slanted frontal bone or a forehead. Women have a little bit more of a vertical forehead. So basically in women, this area right here juts out just a little bit more than in males. The external occipital refers to the back of the skull. So like if you reach back and you like just touch the back of your head, that's the occipital region. It's prominent and even kind of like hook shaped in males. It kind of sticks out more. There's a little bump. Like, I don't know if you're a male, you can see it. If you're not, maybe go find a male and rub their head. I don't know. But there's a definite spot right back there for males. With females, it's less prominent. And the mastoid process that's in the ear, there's a conical bone sticking out at the skull, at the back of the ear. In males, it's larger, and in females, it's a little more pointed. Looking at other parts of the skeleton, females' pelvises are a little different. In puberty, the female pelvis starts to kind of expand in width, and this is honestly for one reason only, and that is to give childbirth. So as a female carries a baby, it creates kind of a bowl for the embryo and the fetus to sit in while it's developing. Males don't have that. And so the female pelvis at the front is an inverted U. Men have a little bit more of a V. That's right here. The sacrum in the males is a little bit longer and more tapered. The females is normally a little bit blunter. That's the sacrum right there. Those two, the very end of that right there. The pelvic inlet is wider. That's this area right here. It's wider. It allows women to have children. Okay. There's a lot of other clues, but the thing is a lot of these things that develop in adulthood instead of in childhood. So if you find the skeleton of a child that is in prepubescence, you might not be able to tell as easily. A lot of these things that we've talked about just now are only apparent after puberty. So again, identifying the gender and age of a child is a lot more difficult. So let's talk about determining the age. One of the things, the epiphyseal fusion, and we talked about that just a second ago. Let me talk more about it. As you're born, there's a lot of space between your bones. This allows for flexibility of being born, but it also allows for you to survive injuries and things like that while you're a kid. And it's just a maturing process. One of the things you can do is look at these hands, look at the x-rays of these hands, look at these bones right here. There's a lot of space in between those, and they're still fusing to some degree. The cartilage will turn into bone after a while. Take a look at this adult hand. See how there's a lot less space? That is epiphyseal fusion, okay? That process where this becomes calcified and turns into bone. Again, with children, remember that there are 206 bones in adults, but almost 300 bones in a child. and so those bones fuse as an adult, but they haven't fused as a child. That can give you an indication as to the age of the skeleton, as to how much epiphyseal fusion has occurred. It stops at around the age of 25, so it does make it difficult in this case to tell the age of a skeleton after the age of 25. Okay, so that's interesting, but a lot of it has to do with how much epiphyseal fusion has occurred. Teeth, again, same thing. You know, you had your baby teeth, so if you find a skeleton that still has its baby teeth, then you know that that they're still in some phase of pre-adulthood. Adults have their full teeth, and we're going to talk about dental records in a minute, and that helps an awful lot with identifying. But one of the problems once you get grown up is that you're basically, your body has quit developing, and now you're just maintaining, and that gives a problem for forensic scientists, because now there's no more change for us to be able to use as a timing event. And so now we've got to find places in the body that do continue to change over time. Pubic symphysis, that's right in front of the pubis, right above, you know, your naughty parts. The pubic symphysis, that continues. It's a fairly consistent one through your life. It continues to develop even after you're old, and that's a good physiological age marker. So that's one spot that we know, and there's a few, but that's one spot that we know. Another one is right between your ribs. You have that spot right there, like right smack in the middle and right at the bottom. It's called the hyaloid process. Right in through there, that's another place where the cartilage continues to fuse together as time goes by. As you're young, it's still very flexible, but the older you get, it becomes less and less flexible because it slowly calcifies. And also where, you know, like I told you that with a baby, the skull was a lot of different bones that were going to fuse together. They become less, where those fuse together, those are called sutures. The older you get, the less distinct they are. So there's lots of things. There's at least 3 right there that we can use to determine the age of someone that's past puberty, past that rapid development stage. So then dental records are a really great way for humans to be identified, because this is part of our bone structure that is going to survive a long-term decay process, but this is part of our bone structure that has dental, you know, we've had work done on it, and there's records kept on it. When I go to my dentist, my dental hygienist pulls up my records, and you can see on the screen all the work they've done to my teeth. And I've been on a lot of wrecks and accidents and things like that, so I've had some work done on my teeth. And I comment, I'm like, my gosh, if I didn't have a dentist, my head would look like a pumpkin, a jack-o'-lantern's teeth. But those records are readily available. They're easy to get for a forensic investigator, and as a result, if you find a skeleton, you can take a long look at the dental records. Now, there's a couple of ways to go about this. Okay, the first way is to kind of confirm, okay, that this is who you think this is. So we think this is John Doe. Now, because we found his driver's license and a few other things that give us a tentative identification, so then we petition to have their dental records delivered, which there always are, and then we can say, yeah, look at here's where they got a cavity there, and they had another cavity filled there, and you compare it to the teeth that you have in front of you, and it's very good evidence that this is the person. So it helps in identification. When you suspect you know who it is, it's easier to narrow down. So one thing that you do is you've got 4 possible results of using the dental records. The first one is a positive identification. The ante-mortem, which means before death, and the post-mortem data match with no discrepancies. That's a possible positive identification. That's John Doe. We know it because his teeth look just like they did the last time he went to the dentist. A possible identification says that the the ante-mortem data is very consistent with the post-mortem data. There may be some things that happen to the teeth, but that could have been because they didn't go to the dentist for a while, or there could have been damage to the teeth when death occurred. We're very confident that this is John Doe, but we can't say for certainty, so this is what we call a possible identification. Sometimes there's lack of evidence. The teeth are missing. There hasn't been much dental records available because the person didn't go to the dentist very much. There was damage to the mouth area in whatever caused them to die, and that's insufficient evidence, and they can't draw a conclusion. They think they got it, but they're not sure, so they can't say. And then finally, the exclusion is that there's just simply no match. And so an interesting thing about the exclusion is you can say, you know what, we don't think this is John Doe. The dental records suggest different. We know he had a driver's license that said John Doe. We know he was wearing John Doe's clothes, but the dental records say otherwise. And so that's an exclusion is actually a very important thing for a forensic investigator to get. Sometimes we don't really know who the victim is. So we got a victim and we got dental records, but we don't know who it is. So we have to kind of come at this from a different angle. We have to do what's called dental profiling, and it starts limiting the population pool down. It provides post-mortem dental profiling provides information on how old the person was, their gender, their ancestry, their socioeconomic background. I mean, think about it. You can from the dental records tell their race or their ethnicity. And you can also tell their socioeconomic background. This person was wealthy enough to be able to afford this expensive type of dentistry, veneers or polymer caps. They had gold fillings, which also denotes that they had some wealth to them. Or they didn't take care of their teeth very well, suggesting that they had a lower socioeconomic background. God knows if they looked in my teeth what they would think. Also, we can actually extract some DNA. Even after years of a body being out in the woods or out in some type of a field that is decaying, even after years of being buried, we can pull some DNA out of the very inside of the teeth called the dentin. And that DNA can then be used to possibly match with the National DNA Database. All right, that's it. Man, this was pretty short. So make sure that you are working on this. Go through this a few times, pull down the notes, and complete the notes. It's going to take a few times through this. This wasn't that difficult, and I think it's really interesting, but you got to go through it a few times with the notes. So, all right, get to work.